It's late morning on November 2nd, 2007, and 29-year-old Filomena Romanelli is on her way to the fair with a friend when her phone rings. It's her roommate Amanda, and she sounds a little scared. Amanda tells her that when she arrived to their flat in Perugia, Italy that morning, something seemed off. The door had not just been open, but wide open. One of the toilets was unflushed, and there were a couple of droplets of blood in a bathroom sink. Amanda says that she left the apartment and is on her way back to her boyfriend's place now, but before she goes into a full-on panic, she thought she'd call and ask Filomena, maybe there's some kind of simple explanation for all of this. But Filomena doesn't have an explanation for any of the stuff Amanda's seeing, and Filomena's heart immediately starts to race. She tells Amanda she spent the night at her boyfriend's place and she hasn't even been home. She knows Laura, another of their roommates, is in Rome on business, but she suggests calling their other roommate, Meredith, who she thinks is around. But what Filomena really wants her to do is go back to the apartment and see if anything has been stolen. So Amanda says she's on her way to her boyfriend's place now. She'll ask him to come back with her, and then she'll call Filomena back. So she says okay and hangs up. But the minutes tick by and there's still no call that comes in from Amanda. Finally, Filomena gives up waiting and just calls her herself. When she reaches her, Amanda says that she's just finishing breakfast at her boyfriend's place now, but that the two of them are just about to head back to the girl's apartment, and she'll call back once they get there. Amanda calls back a few minutes later to say that the window to Filomena's room has been smashed, so it has clearly been broken into. And she tells Filomena that she and her boyfriend have already called police. But Amanda says she took a quick peek around and it looks like Filomena's is the only room that's been tossed. And it doesn't actually look like there's anything missing. And that should make Filomena feel better, but it doesn't at all. So she and her friend turn the car around and start back towards the apartment to check it out for themselves. Along the way, Filomena calls her boyfriend Marco and asks him to meet her there. And by the time she arrives, he's already there with his friend Luca and a couple of plainclothes police officers. Filomena jumps out of the car and races straight into the house and into her room to find even more chaos than she'd imagined. Her room has been completely ransacked. The cabinet doors and drawers are wide open and emptied, and all of her clothes are in a pile on the bed. The glass from the broken window is scattered everywhere, and there's a big rock under her desk, which must be the one used to break the window. But looking at everything there, her roommate Amanda was right. It doesn't look like there's anything missing. Even her computer is still there. Now, Amanda's room looks how it did when she left it. Not tidy, but not a hellscape either. And their roommate Laura's room still looks perfect too. The only room that they can't check is Meredith's because her door is locked.
And I assume that means the locked door is strange, or...
Yeah.
at least not typical.
Yeah, Filomena knows that Meredith never locks that door for more than 2 minutes at a time while she's dressing or something, so It is strange. But what's even stranger is that the police officers who were there when Filomena arrived, you see, they actually have Meredith's cell phones.
Phones plural?
Yeah, one is her British cell phone, and the other one is actually one that Filomena loaned her to use just for local calls in Italy. And so, again, the strange part is these officers are not there in response to the call that Amanda and her boyfriend made about a break-in. They came because they found both phones in someone's back garden earlier that morning. They found out who they belonged to and were coming to return them. So at this point, they're all kind of looking at each other, and the officers are well, if you guys are saying there's nothing missing from the house, we're just going to go file a report for these phones. Except Filomena and Amanda are hold up, you guys have her phones, her door is locked, and someone has broken into our house and you're just going to leave? It didn't feel right to them.
Yeah, seriously.
In Filomena's gut, she knows that they need to get into Meredith's room. They need to break down that door. But the officers there say that they can't do that. They're not the right people for the job. According to Amanda Knox's book, Waiting to be Heard, these officers are from the postal police, and they only deal with tech crimes. Again, this is why they're bringing back phones. They say they need to wait for the national police to arrive. Filomena looks at Luca, the biggest of them all, and is you know what? You break it down then. So he lifts his foot and kicks the locked door once, twice, 3 times before the lock finally gives way and the door flies open. According to Ann Wise's reporting for ABC News, Philomena sees Luca turn sheet white, and a moment later, Marco yells, "Sangue, sangue," blood. Philomena's eyes suddenly register what she's seeing. Blood, spatters and streaks. Meredith's duvet is on the floor next to her bed, and sticking out from underneath is a foot. The officers on the scene quickly get everyone outside and call for the homicide squad, who find a woman's body under the duvet in the bedroom, lying on her back and naked from the waist down. There is a large knife wound just under her chin and several smaller stab wounds to her neck. The floor around her body is covered in blood, not to mention smeared on the walls, the door handle, a bookshelf, and there are tiny droplets of blood spattered on the closet doors, which investigators think happened when the woman coughed, choking on blood from the wound to her neck. There are 2 towels under her body too, both covered in blood, and there's a 3rd towel on her bed along with her purse, which has blood on it too, and it's missing both keys and a wallet. Her clothes are also on the floor, and those too are bloodied. Investigators find 3 shoe prints in blood near her body, and more in a trail through the house leading to the door. And they find 1 more bloody footprint, and that's in the bathroom. Unlike the others, this one was made not by a shoe, but actually by a bare foot.
Okay, so you said nothing was taken. The house has been broken into. I guess where are the police's head? Like, what do they think the motive is?
Well, I mean, again, so you have that broken window, which looks like a start to a robbery. But to your point, hardly anything is actually missing. Just Meredith's 2 cell phones and a wallet and keys. Again, the cell phones we end up finding later.
I would say the cell phones aren't even really missing because the police have them.
Yeah, right. And the scene kind of looks like potentially a sexual assault, but if that's the case, it certainly doesn't look like it was planned. So there are a ton of questions to answer, and investigators are hopeful that the results of the autopsy will help them better understand what happened and to your point, why. And hopefully all of that will lead to the even bigger question of who. Now, in addition to those wounds I mentioned on her neck, one of which had been fatal, during the autopsy, the medical examiner finds bruising on her head, face, neck, and elbows. According to The Forgotten Killer, a book by Douglas Preston and John Douglas, the victim also had defensive wounds on her hands, and there was also deep bruising on her right side, her forearm, hip, and leg. While the medical examiner can't say with absolute certainty, the time of death is estimated at about 10 p.m. on Thursday, November 1st. What he can say for certain, though, is that the victim, as suspected, is 21-year-old Meredith Kircher.
So you mentioned sexual assault earlier. Did they find any evidence of that?
So I found source material that said there was no conclusive evidence of sexual assault, but then I also found others that said there was. So there's no consistency out there on this particular point. What I do know, though, is that the ME does find male DNA inside her vagina. And after some testing and comparison, they learned that it isn't from anyone Meredith was known to have a sexual relationship with.
Okay, but I don't get it. If there's sperm, that seems pretty cut and dry to me that there was a sexual assault. What's the confusion with the source materials?
So it's actually not sperm. It's just DNA. So if you really look closely at it, it's just skin cells.
Oh.
And you got to remember, determining sexual assault is more than just DNA. Like, you can have a consensual encounter that leaves DNA behind for hours, even days, depending on the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
I found an Italy magazine article that pulls directly from the autopsy report and says that a sexual act did take place or was attempted, maybe several minutes before her death, maybe even several hours, but the ME looked for signs of forcible sex. So again, we're looking for like bruising, tearing, that kind of thing, which either was or wasn't there, again, depending on the source material.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, investigators collect a ton of other evidence at the crime scene. According to the Murder of Meredith Kircher website, nearly 200 samples of DNA evidence came out of the apartment during the initial processing. Now, police expect to find trace evidence of Meredith, her roommates, the guy she'd been seeing, but along with that unknown male DNA found inside Meredith's body, there are unknown fingerprints and palm prints too. Some of them are even in blood. And others police collected in key locations, like the pillow that was under Meredith's hips. Now, because they're in blood, these fingerprints could only be left by one person, and that's the person who was with Meredith during her death, the person who killed her. It takes police another couple of weeks, but finally, they find a match for the unknown fingerprints found at the crime scene. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. We talk about BetterHelp a lot on this show, and this month we're discussing some